Hey there, first graders. Today we have kind of a fun math lesson. I wish that we could all be together at school doing this because this lesson is a lot of fun. Today we are going to talk about how shapes can be put together to create new shapes. And sometimes shapes are put together to create flat shapes, like two-dimensional shapes. And sometimes flat shapes are put together to create a three-dimensional shape. So we're going to go over some of those today, and I want to remind you of some of those vocabulary words about sides and corners if it's a flat shape, and then faces and edges once we get to those three-dimensional shapes. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to show you on my screen here some of the shapes that we can create. So I'm going to just tilt this down here so that you can see. All right, so here's my first shape, a square. So squares are fun because squares can be put together to create a rectangle. And that's basically what a rectangle is two squares put together. Once you push them together, you have created a rectangle. Okay, so remembering that when we're talking about flat shapes like this, you can count sides and corners. Let me show you. I have these, my magnet blocks too, that I can show you. And these will work too because they just connect right together. So I've got my flat two squares. When pushed together, they create a rectangle. All right, so two squares is how we come up with a rectangle. For squares, if I separate these guys back out, squares have four sides and four corners, okay? Once we push them together, they create a rectangle. And rectangles are the same. They still have four sides and four corners, but the important thing to remember about a rectangle is that when you create a rectangle, you're going to have two short and two long. So you have two short sides over here and two long sides here and here. But they still have four corners, okay? So that is how we put shapes together to create a rectangle. You take two squares, when you push them together, they form a rectangle. Four sides, four corners. However, a rectangle has two long and two short, where the square has all of their sides being exactly the same. All right, so that's how we can create a rectangle using squares. Now I want to show you how we can use different shapes to create this shape. So remember that this is a trapezoid, and a trapezoid has four sides and four corners like a square does, but like I said before, they're different sizes. The square, all of your sides are exactly the same, and this trapezoid, they're not all exactly the same. Like this one at the top is a little shorter, this one at the bottom is much longer, okay? So I just want to show you some examples of how I could put together different shapes. So here I've got three triangles. If I want to make a trapezoid just like this, I can use three triangles to create a trapezoid. They have to be all the exact same size triangle, but once I push them together, look at that. It has created the exact same shape. It has a short side on the top, a long side on the bottom, and then two more short diagonal sides. Same as before, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 corners, but I've created it using three different triangles. Once I push them together, I've created my own trapezoid. Okay, there's one more way I want to show you how to do this, and it takes one rhombus and one triangle. And remember that your rhombus is just kind of like a square that has been squished more into a diamond shape. It still has four sides, four corners, and all of the sides are still exactly the same, but they're squished into a kind of diagonal diamond shape. And here's how you use a rhombus and a triangle. You push them together like this, and you've created another trapezoid. Okay, same thing as before. The sides are still the same, four. Corners are still the same, four. And the sizes of the sides are still the same. Long on the bottom, shorter on the top. So that's how you can create a trapezoid using different shapes. We can put shapes together to create a new shape. I want to show you one more. Here we have a hexagon. Hex means six. This has six sides, six corners. Remember that the side is the line of the flat shape, and the corner is where those two lines meet together. So here's our hexagon. This one has six sides, six corners. I can create a hexagon I've got all these triangles here. I can actually use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 triangles to create a hexagon. And each of these triangles is going to become one of the sides. So watch as I push these together. So I'm going to create a hexagon by putting different shapes together. So I can push all of these triangles together, and then just like that, I have created a hexagon. It's the exact same. It's got 6 sides and 6 corners where those sides come together. Here's another way that you could create a hexagon. I've got these 3 here. This is 3 rhombuses. Okay, so remember those are kind of like a diamond, and to create a hexagon, I can push all 3 of my rhombuses together and I've created another hexagon. Those shapes can be pushed together to create a new shape. 3 rhombuses can create a hexagon, 6 triangles can create a hexagon, or, check this out, I could have a triangle, a rhombus, and a trapezoid, and I can push them together to create another hexagon. So putting shapes together, you can use different shapes to create a new shape. So that's all of my hexagons that I have there. Now, I want to show you how we can put shapes together to make some 3-dimensional shapes. I already showed you how 2 squares can be put together to make a rectangle. But I want to show you how a bunch of squares can be put together to make a cube. So a cube is basically made up of all squares. And you take all these flat shapes that are squares, and once you have them kind of like this, what I can do is build my squares going up. I have to lift this up a bit. I can lift all these squares going up here. Remember, they were all flat shapes. They were all just flat squares before, and now I can push them up into a 3-dimensional shape, add 1 more square on the top, and I've created a cube. Now remember, for cubes, these are your faces. The flat surface of your 3-dimensional shape is a face. This is a face that's a square. This is a face, it's a square. This is a face, it's a square. Basically, all the faces of the cube are squares. And so that is how you can use flat shapes of squares and put them together and create a cube. So a cube is made up of all squares. Now, to create a rectangular prism, you're going to use more squares, but you're going to turn those squares first into rectangles. Let me take this apart here really quick, and I'll show you how we're going to flatten it out again. So I've flattened it out. It's all flat shapes, and it is all squares, but remember that when you push those 2 squares together, they create a rectangle. So I have a rectangle green, rectangle purple, rectangle green. I'm going to create another rectangle for the top that's going to be purple, and then my 2 sides, my 2 faces on the side are going to be the blue. So I've got all flat shapes. To create a 3-dimensional shape, I take those flat shapes and I push them up together. I'm almost got it. I got to put my top on, and now I have a rectangular prism. Okay, so for the rectangular prism, we have this face is a rectangle, this face is a rectangle, this face is a rectangle, this other face is a rectangle, but my sides, these faces are a square. So a rectangular prism is made up of faces that are rectangle and faces that are square. And remember that edges are where your 2 shapes are coming together, where this line is meeting and forming an edge. It's almost like how the corners come together. So where my green line, my green side meets my purple side, it comes together and it creates an edge right here. This blue meets the purple, it comes together right here, creates an edge. So 3-dimensional shapes have edges, they still have corners, they have faces too. All right, just a few more here. I don't have any more that I'm going to build for you. But this is a cylinder. This is created using 2 circles. So those shapes are used when creating a cylinder. The other one that I wanted to talk about is a cone. This is the only cone I could find in Lucy's playroom, and most cones come to a point at the bottom. This particular cone in her playroom just has a flattened surface at the bottom, but most cones will come to a sharp point at the end, like an ice cream cone. This uses a flat shape of a circle to create a cone. So both cone and cylinder have flat shapes of circles used. Circles are used to create these three-dimensional shapes. Okay, so remembering that a lot of shapes can be put together to create new shapes. You can use flat shapes to create a three-dimensional shape, or you can use flat shapes to create a new flat shape, like using triangles to create a hexagon. So remember all these vocabulary words: sides, corners, faces, and edges, and how all of those words come together when we are talking about shapes. Don't forget to do your iReady lessons. You'll have an iReady quiz coming up about all of this information soon, so make sure you're taking the time to get on iReady and complete your lessons. I hope you have a great day. Bye!